6 days ago, they handed out trophies at the 2026 Pittsburgh Pro, and half the guys on that stage wouldn't have placed in 2015. And I'm not talking about conditioning, I'm not talking about peak week, I'm talking about something deeper, a category of physique that is vanishing right in front of us, and nobody in the press releases is calling it what it actually is. What's happening to bodybuilding right now isn't evolution, it's a collapse. And the thing replacing natural aesthetics is something most people in this sport aren't ready to talk about honestly. I want you to meet Marcus, not a real person, a composite of dozens of guys I've seen in this community over the last decade. Marcus is 23 years old, he trains 6 days a week, he eats clean, he tracks his macros obsessively, and he genuinely loves this sport. He started watching bodybuilding videos at 16, got inspired by the classic physiques, Frank Zane, Bob Paris, the kind of aesthetic that looked like a human being pushed to a beautiful limit. And Marcus thought, I want that, I can build that, so he got to work. 5 years later, Marcus is shredded. He's strong, he's disciplined, and he looks genuinely impressive. But he doesn't look anything like the guys winning shows in 2026. And here's the part that messes with his head. He's doing everything right. He's training harder than ever, his diet is dialed in, his sleep is optimized. But the physiques on stage have moved so far past what any natural training protocol can produce that Marcus is starting to wonder if the sport he fell in love with even exists anymore. And honestly, that's the right question to be asking. Because Marcus's experience isn't unique. It's a pattern that's playing out across the entire sport right now, and the data behind it is genuinely alarming. A study published in the European Heart Journal in May 2025 analyzed over 20,000 athletes from 2005 to 2020, and what it found should have been front-page news in every fitness publication on the planet. Professional male bodybuilders face a fivefold higher risk of sudden cardiac death compared to amateur bodybuilders. 5 times. And the average age of death in that study was 45 years old. 45 years old. Think about that for a second. These are people who dedicated their entire lives to physical discipline, to optimizing every variable of their body, and the sport itself is killing them at 45. The autopsy reports from that study kept showing the same 2 things: cardiomegaly, which is abnormal heart enlargement, and ventricular hypertrophy, which is a dangerous thickening of the heart muscle walls. And the researchers were very clear about what was driving it: anabolic steroid abuse, extreme training loads, and the brutal dehydration and dietary restriction that comes with competition prep. Now here's the part that I genuinely could not believe when I read it. The debate inside the industry in January 2026, and I want you to hear this clearly, had shifted from how do we prevent steroid-related deaths to arguing about whether the number of fatalities should be slightly lower. Not 0, slightly lower. That's where the conversation is. That's the normalization that's happened in professional bodybuilding. And it tells you everything you need to know about how far the sport has drifted from anything resembling a healthy pursuit of physical excellence. So how did we get here? Because this didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by accident. To understand the collapse of natural aesthetics in bodybuilding, you have to go back to a fork in the road that the sport hit in the early 1990s. Before that point, bodybuilding had 2 competing visions of what the ideal physique looked like. One vision was about proportionality, the Greek statue idea, where symmetry and shape mattered as much as size. The other vision was about mass, pure overwhelming mass, and the question of which vision would win was answered by whoever could get biggest the fastest. And when growth hormone entered the competitive scene at scale in the late 80s and early 90s, mass won decisively. The physiques that started winning shows weren't just bigger, they were a different biological category entirely, and the judges rewarded it, the federations rewarded it, the supplement companies sponsored it, and the message that filtered down to every gym in America was, bigger is better, and if you're not getting bigger fast enough, you're not trying hard enough. That message has been compounding for 30 years, and what you're seeing on the 2026 Pittsburgh Pro stage is where that compounding leads. Curious, here's where the story gets genuinely interesting, though, because the system that created this problem is more complicated than just steroids bad. The IFBB Pro League, the organization that runs the Pittsburgh Pro, the New York Pro, the Olympia, doesn't conduct routine drug testing at its major events. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's just a documented fact about how the federation operates. And when you remove testing from a competitive environment where the prize money, the sponsorships, and the social media following all go to whoever looks most extreme, you've created a selection pressure that guarantees escalation. Think about it from a purely competitive logic standpoint. If your competitor is using compounds that allow them to carry 30 extra pounds of muscle, and there's no testing, and the judges are rewarding that size, what choice does a rational competitor make? This is what economists call a prisoner's dilemma, and bodybuilding has been trapped in it for decades. Individual athletes make choices that are rational for them personally but catastrophic for the sport collectively. And the people who refuse to play the game, the athletes who genuinely compete naturally, they get filtered out of the professional ranks entirely. Now, I promised you something earlier. I said I'd tell you what's actually replacing natural aesthetics, and it's not what most people in this community are talking about. But before I get there, I want to show you the psychological layer of this collapse, because the numbers here are just as disturbing as the cardiac data, and they affect a much larger group of people than just the professionals on stage. A March 2025 study found that nearly 3% of boys and men aged 15 to 35 in Canada and the United States show signs of probable muscle dysmorphia, what researchers sometimes call bigorexia. And that might sound like a small number until you do the math on the population size we're talking about. But here's the stat that really got me. A January 2026 study of fitness club members found that almost 40%, 38.5%, were at risk of body dysmorphic disorder. 4 out of 10 people in the gym. That's not a fringe problem. That's a structural feature of how this culture operates. And this is where Marcus's story connects to something much bigger than one guy's training journey. Because the physiques that Marcus is comparing himself to, the ones he's watching on YouTube, seeing on Instagram, studying at the Pittsburgh Pro, those physiques are not achievable through any natural training protocol. They require pharmaceutical intervention at a level that the sport does not publicly acknowledge. So Marcus is measuring himself against a standard that is, by definition, impossible for him to reach naturally, and then wondering why he feels like he's failing. That's not a personal weakness. That's a system designed to make him feel inadequate. Serious, and the supplement industry knows this. As of March 2026, researchers are actively urging higher regulation of bodybuilding supplement marketing because of what they're calling a medical Wild West, a fast-moving online marketplace where fitness influencers can generate millions of views promoting compounds like testosterone, ibutamorin, and ostarine, with essentially no scientific backing for their efficacy or safety, and no regulatory response fast enough to keep up. A 2019 study that was still being cited in January 2026 found that nearly 40% of gym users consume fitness supplements without any medical consultation. Nearly 6% were using steroids. Almost 5% were using diuretics. So let me paint the full picture of what the system actually looks like from the inside. You've got professional shows with no drug testing, rewarding increasingly extreme physiques. You've got social media algorithms that amplify the most extreme content because it gets the most engagement. You've got supplement companies with financial incentives to keep people chasing an unreachable standard. You've got influencers promoting gray market compounds to audiences of teenagers. And you've got a psychological environment where 40% of gym members are already at risk of body dysmorphia. Every single one of those forces is pointing in the same direction, and none of them are pointing toward health. Okay, so now let's talk about the people this system works for, because there are some, and to be fair to the full picture, I have to show you both sides. For a small number of elite athletes, the current system has created extraordinary careers. Guys like Mikkel Krisanen, who just won the 2026 Pittsburgh Pro, are genuinely exceptional physical specimens who have dedicated everything to their craft. The discipline required to compete at that level is real, the sacrifice is real, and dismissing these athletes entirely would be intellectually dishonest. And the defenders of the current system make some arguments that are worth taking seriously. They'll tell you that adults have the right to make informed decisions about their own bodies, and that's a legitimate point. They'll argue that the sport has always pushed human limits, and that discomfort with extreme physiques is partly just aesthetic preference. They'll point out that plenty of professional athletes in other sports, football, baseball, cycling, have their own complicated relationships with performance enhancement, and bodybuilding isn't uniquely corrupt. These aren't stupid arguments. They deserve a real response. Here's the rebuttal, though. The informed adult choice argument breaks down when the information itself is systematically distorted, when the industry actively conceals the mortality data, when the supplement marketing is deliberately misleading, when the social media environment creates body dysmorphia in teenagers who are not making fully informed choices. And the other sports do it too. Argument doesn't make the 45-year average age of death any less real. A fivefold increase in sudden cardiac death risk isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a structural outcome of a system that has removed every incentive for restraint. Now, here's the part I've been building toward, and this is the thing that actually surprised me when I dug into the data. Because the collapse of natural aesthetics in professional bodybuilding isn't the end of the story. Something is genuinely replacing it, and it's coming from a direction that the traditional bodybuilding establishment did not see coming and is not prepared for. Excited what's replacing the natural aesthetic ideal in bodybuilding is a fragmentation, a splintering of the monolithic, what a great body looks like, into dozens of competing subcultures, each with their own standards, their own influencers, and their own communities. And the one that's growing fastest, the one that's pulling the most engagement from the exact demographic that professional bodybuilding is losing, the 18 to 35-year-olds, is calisthenics and functional aesthetics. The physique that looks like it can actually do something. The body that performs, not just poses. And this isn't just a vibe shift, there's real data behind it. The 2026 fitness trend reports show wearable technology and performance tracking at the top of what people actually want from their training, not competition prep, not peak week aesthetics. People want to know how their body performs, how their heart rate responds, how their recovery metrics look. The conversation has shifted from how big can I get to how capable can I become. And that shift is happening at the consumer level faster than the professional sport is adapting to it. Even inside the professional bodybuilding community, some of the sport's most respected voices are starting to say what used to be unsayable. Top professionals in 2025 and 2026 have been publicly questioning the bigger isn't better mentality and criticizing the prevalence of distended stomachs, the so-called bubble gut, on competition stages. When the people who built their careers in this system start saying the aesthetic has gone too far, that's not a fringe opinion anymore. That's the beginning of a reckoning. And then there's the AI factor, which is the wild card that nobody in this conversation is talking about clearly enough. AI is already transforming how coaching works, how programming gets built, how nutrition gets personalized. The 2026 fitness landscape has AI-driven tools doing skin analysis, recovery optimization, and training periodization at a level that was impossible 3 years ago. And here's the thing, that technology is genuinely democratizing access to elite-level coaching for natural athletes. The information advantage that used to require an expensive coach or a pharmaceutical sponsor is now available to anyone with a smartphone. Whispers, but here's the dark side of that same technology. And this is the part they're not putting in the press releases about AI and fitness. The same tools that can optimize a natural athlete's training can also generate content that makes pharmaceutical physiques look achievable through natural means. AI can create before and after transformations that never happen. It can write supplement marketing that sounds scientific but isn't. It can flood social media with content that makes the distorted standard feel normal. The technology is neutral. What matters is who's using it and what incentives they're operating under. So let's bring this back to Marcus, because I want to show you how this story actually ends, or more accurately, how it can end. Because Marcus has a choice that the professional bodybuilding system doesn't want him to know he has. Marcus can keep measuring himself against a standard that requires pharmaceutical intervention he's not willing to undertake and feel like he's failing forever. Or Marcus can recognize that the aesthetic ideal he originally fell in love with, the proportional, functional, genuinely impressive natural physique, is not dead. It just moved. It's not on the professional competition stage anymore. It's in the calisthenics park. It's in the functional fitness community. It's in the growing subculture of athletes who are asking what their body can do rather than how extreme it can look. And here's the thing that I think is genuinely hopeful about this moment. The fragmentation of the aesthetic ideal is actually good news for most people in this community. When there was one dominant standard, the mass monster professional bodybuilder, everyone who couldn't or wouldn't pursue that path felt like they were losing. Now there are multiple competing visions of physical excellence, and the one that's gaining the most cultural momentum is the one that's most achievable, most sustainable, and most compatible with actually living a long, healthy life. That's not a consolation prize. That's a better sport. Now let me give you something concrete, because I don't want this to be a video you watch and feel vaguely informed by and then forget. If you're in this community, if you're training, if you're competing, if you're just someone who cares about building a physique you're proud of, here's what the data actually tells you to do with all of this. First, if you're comparing your progress to professional bodybuilding, physiques you're seeing on social media or competition stages, stop. Not because you're not good enough, but because you're using a measuring stick that's been chemically extended past the point of relevance to your situation. Second, if you're buying supplements based on what you've seen influencers promote, especially anything in the gray market category, the SARMs, the peptides, the compounds that are technically not steroids but are definitely not protein powder, please talk to an actual doctor before you put anything like that in your body. The research is clear that nearly 40% of gym users are consuming supplements without medical consultation, and the regulatory environment around these products is genuinely dangerous right now. Your long-term health is worth more than a few extra pounds of muscle in the short term. And third, and this is the one I feel most strongly about, if you're someone who loves the aesthetic of a genuinely impressive natural physique, the kind that Marcus originally fell in love with, invest your energy in the communities that are actually building that. The calisthenics community, the functional fitness community, the natural bodybuilding federations that do actually test. These aren't consolation prizes for people who couldn't make it in the IFBB. They're the communities where the aesthetic ideal that professional bodybuilding abandoned is still alive and being built by people who are going to be healthy at 45 instead of dead. The 2026 Pittsburgh Pro happened last week. The New York Pro predictions are flying around from Dennis James, Milo Sarset, Chris Cormier, Ian Valier, all the voices that have been inside this system for decades. And I don't doubt that the athletes competing at those shows are extraordinary human beings who have sacrificed enormously for their craft. But the system those shows represent is producing a 45-year average age of death, a fivefold cardiac risk, and a psychological environment that's putting 4 out of 10 gym members at risk of body dysmorphia. That's not a sport at its peak. That's a sport in crisis. And Marcus, our composite of every guy who got into this sport because they saw something beautiful and wanted to build it, Marcus is going to be okay. Because he figured out that the sport he fell in love with didn't die. It just moved. And the version of physical excellence that's replacing the old aesthetic ideal is more honest, more sustainable, and frankly more impressive than anything you're going to see on a professional bodybuilding stage in 2026. The collapse of natural aesthetics in professional bodybuilding isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a better one, and you get to decide which chapter you're writing.